The trauma of war. The consequences of this war and all the other wars fought on foreign soil will never be forgotten. Not because of the strange alienation of being in a different time zone, culture, or political environment, but because of the trail of tears and leaves behind. Suffering is a mild word to describe what happens to a man or woman exposed to the brutalities of a war. A refusal to accept the normalcy of a war is not uncommon and takes courage. Unfortunately, this kind of courage is often translated into cowardice by those engaged and strong-willed to continue to kill and defend their honor, their country's honor and the honor of those died trying to win this war. This rhetoric of mind-blowing propaganda is not without some criminality or victimization of the innocents. There is a thin line of conscious awakening at work here that is mixed with this trauma and creates a chemical imbalance that is acted out by bizarreness and unusual emotions. Even the subconscious gets into the act and compounds this attack created by the trauma on the brain to work on the mechanics of guilt 24/7 until it is pounded into the head so deep, it cannot escape. This hammering of the mind is joined by the blackness and coldness of a heart that is searching for all the right answers in a darkness too thick to penetrate without someone or something giving them a light to see where they are going and what they are searching for. It's a most confusing time in their life and it never stops. Once the trauma is settled into the mind, the nightmare of this reality remains forever. It is nothing compared to the healing of an actual war wound inflicted by a bullet, a piece of shrapnel or even the sickness of war itself. There is no magic medicine or chemical concoction that can heal this matter. It has been layered with scar tissue on the brain and stimulated every time a trigger sensed brings back the memories like it was yesterday. Whether in battle or standing down for the next orders to engage, the mind never stopped. Distracted with letter to home, a friendly card game or a solitary moment to listen to some soothing music, the mind never stops working the trauma around the brain and slipping it even deeper than we can imagine. It is as if a dark black hole is being fed with events, screams or tears of combat, gross and vivid recollected visions of human destruction, graphics and sounds, and other emotions that include fear and hate stirred into a portion of distressing magnitudes, hampering, crippling, and bothering the persons continuously and giving the mind too much to bear at one time. Not only a fabrication of the truth as experienced but together, a harmony of illusions related to their own lives and the destruction of their own values and morality. Confused, bewildered and angry, these emotions tear a mind apart with no recourse but to accept it as we waited for the next command to do it all over again. Once torn, it never heals and the scar tissue that grows, only hides the pain temporarily. Combined with the artificial help of ingested or injected chemicals, dope, amphetamines, and any other controlled substance or narcotic they could find or seek, their minds get ready to handle another load of trauma that has the mind already on overload and cramming space to find some more room to handle the oncoming onslaught of more horror and pain as well as sorrow. Sorry for the friends lost in battle and sorrow for the behavior that is contradictory to civilized men. There was even sorrow and remorse for the innocents lost during the firefight, but their end was justified by the fact they were called the enemy, and in order to win this way, we had to kill the enemy, men, women, children, or any foe perceived to be standing in the way of victory. No matter how violent or brutal the war had become, in order to justify the actions taken, would need to shut down the emotions of men and disregard the fact that war is nothing but the genocide of innocent people caught between the good and the bad, the sane and insane and the strong-willed and the now wavering in strength to continue to fight because their mind has been overloaded with guilt and pain of their losses and a suffering conscience. There is no transitional process, it shifts unpredictably and without a warning. As the mind reshapes its own values of life and the heart conflicts with what the mind is trying to do, the human body is twisted into unethical proportions like never before as the struggle to remain sane and not go crazy continues to remap the brain and enlarge the guilt already formed there. In this process, there is a difficult process ongoing that conflicts with the humanity of innocent people, young soldiers dying for what sometimes appears to be a no good reason to die for, and the reshaping of a world created by the trauma of war. What has happened is a complete chemical metamorphic change of the body and mind that allows you to continue fighting without counting the souls of those who are dying. These changes impact perspectives, truths or lies, character values, body gestures and verbal expressions, a relative strong desire to either be involved or withdraw depending on the conscious and the encounter of vulnerable exposures to the operation's values and strategic plans to fight the enemy with more power than ever before and destroy more than ever imagined. We begin to act like we are infected by prioritizing all the wrong priorities that ensure the survival of this situation. No longer a strategical effort but rather, a subjective and personal interaction and blunder towards the horrors of war because of the unexpected and unexplainable realities of what war really does to you. In many ways, war's trauma changes a man to a point of no return unless the harm can be undone, but that is currently impossible as we are stuck with the nightmares inside our heads, and somehow, survival means to overcome the pressures inside and learn to cope with them while trying not to think of what all has occurred since you arrived in the middle of this brutal and horror-filled war. In the meantime, the mind and body is trying to find a means to justify the violence and inequality of life by reorientations delivered by our own government, telling us what we did was honorable, necessary, and fruitful for the final outcome of this war. Hurtling ourselves into this unreal world to situate the significance of life and death, our psychological perspectives have been transformed into a landscape of horrors. Gone are the conceptual boundaries of our own integrity, ethical and moral values, as our characteristics have been changed into the globally influence of power. The power to kill, to destroy, and to take away whatever it was the enemy held onto and use it against us. We have become participants in an unreal war that cannot ever be forgotten. The insights received, the horrors witnessed and the emotions suffered are to remain with us forever. Our heads are now filled with new models of reality and the sense of force and power is overwhelming. Evicting the ethical boundaries of the past, we take on new ones based on consequences and desires to get this war over with, to reduce the misery and human suffering and experiences that have already consumed our brains. What was once honor, is now a mere tool for survival. The whole concept of war has changed, and whatever values one possessed before, they are now gone and gone forever. The human impulse to the trauma of war is immeasurable. It spares no pain, no space, no time, and it works constantly to burn your brain into a model of hate and anger that has no end to it. Your visions of reality have been severely distorted. What is real is now unreal, and what is insane was once the sanity you arrived with. In balancing the war, you lost half your humanity to a coldness that comes and goes, even when the battle is over. It lingers forever, and the mind and body feel the tremors when they are activated and instinctively want to react to the triggers of war that stimulate your will to survive in drastic, unreal proportions as you seek to fight or flight in any situation. On some days, there is no distinction between fiction and non-fiction. The concept is globally adjusted to seek the upper hand against anything thrown at you or your fellow combatants standing in harm's way. There are no regenerative experiences. There is only remorse and guilt to guide you into the next battle. The fact remains that we all act differently under the conditions of war. Our rethinking has been altered by the mere desire to survive, and those acts necessary to remain alive are sometimes contrary to your own human values and ethical concepts. The diversity of war is often interrupted by the loud explosions of the violence around you. So the diversity of the war comes down to 3Ds: duty, dance, fight, or death. There is no critical assessment made of the situation. It is dog eats dog world, a situation where each man is for himself in order to remain alive. All the literature of wars cannot explain a man's willingness to live unless you experienced the death around you when such tragic events unfold there before your own eyes and not in some book or movie. You can't overlook the realities of war. It stares and scares you, in your face and in your mind, every minute you are alive. This relational event of life and death is much stronger than you can imagine and causes men to prioritize their own thinking and actions accordingly. How they harness the power given by the use of force is marginally controlled by the relationships involved and the intensity of the assault on the mind and body. To use the word dance, rather than fight, is purely a gesture of a metaphor that demonstrates how the war is choreographed by others to perform in certain expectations. It concludes the stage set, the rules of engagement, or rather, the lack of rules in the engagement of war. After all, wars are events created and constructed in time and space in which the boundaries are adjusted according to the perils presented. This is where the war changes mankind. Wars of this kind, Vietnam War, are perpetrated for political actions or power struggles. The soldier, unwittingly willing to fight and die for the cause, has no way of maintaining control of the situation around him and becomes a mere pawn in the war's stages of choreographed disasters. There are no real feelings of dominance or power. It is merely suggested to them that they have the power. It feeds the assumption that they are doing something worthwhile and honorable for duty-caused motivations. It distorts a specific vision that the soldier once had before engaging into this kind of a guerrilla warfare rarely experienced before at such a high-intensity level. Power is viewed by the monopolization of resources that can destroy or kill human beings. Once we engage, we become complicit to the war in all its totality, and nothing can change that. Not even the history books can alter the outcome of the war by a soldier. The trauma of war has been infused into our minds and body in many different ways. Without being scientific about it, we have to admit the phenomenon of trauma can exist through psychoanalytic, medical, artistic, or social terms of the person's own perceptions. It should be made clear that the experience of being traumatized is based on a widely controversial passage that describes an overwhelming experience, of sudden, brutal, catastrophic event in which the response is often delayed or until the mind realizes what it just underwent as a human emotional response. Thereafter, the soldier's mind can experience hallucinations or other intrusive experiences that can be overwhelming in content and context, as well as an unnatural delivery of realities and fiction brought on by confusing thoughts and subconscious awareness. This delivery is best described as an indisputable attempt to intrude the brain and heart with direct or indirect references to knowing or not knowing its origin, however, while still remaining very intelligible to the person. Thus it begins to sort out informally the types of trauma created, and because this trauma is recognized in the form of suffering or disabling the mind, however temporarily, its dominant feature is a political message of the war and how it was fought, experienced, and handled individually or as a group. Something that is purely subjective in nature and therefore, flawed in memory or accuracy as it festers on the mind, over and over. The fact remains that we now know more about the trauma of war than how to heal it. 13.